We've already gone over how to convert decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals. However, those ones were the easy ones because you had place value to go on. The issue comes into play when you are converting a repeating decimal into a fraction because there are no place values. You don't have an ending digit. It goes on forever and ever and ever. So the way to kind of approach this is to think of it as when you go to convert these, you're going to have two columns and both of them are going to represent equal values. On the left, it's going to be represented in variable form. So it's going to be coefficients and variables. On the right side, it's going to be the number form. So something a little bit more familiar. What we do to the left, we know we're going to do to the right. It's just going to look a little bit different because one's going to have variables and one's going to have numbers. Now in this form, we typically use the variable n, just kind of the one that we've all stuck with. And then kind of your thought process is what the bullets are saying, and that you're going to let n equal whatever the decimal is. So whatever the number is, there you go, that's what n is going to equal. You multiply both sides by the same multiple of 10 to make the repeated part of the decimal a whole number. The goal is to get one part of the repeated part as a whole number. Then you subtract the repeated part to leave just the whole number, and then you'll divide each side by the coefficient, and then you simplify the fraction. Sounds a lot more complicated than what it really means to do. Let's take a look at an example. Our first example is we have repeated 0.63. So we are asked to convert 0.63 repeated, into a fraction. We can't just put 63 over 100 because 63 over 100 represents 0.63 end. There's nothing else after it. Because this goes 0.63, 63, 63, 63, 63, 63, 63, 63, forever and ever and ever and ever, never ever ending, we can't rely on place value. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to fill in what n is going to equal. And to the right, I've written out the steps that n is going to equal 0.63. Okay? Repeated. Pretty straightforward, right? Problem was convert point repeated 63 into a fraction, so n's going to be point repeated 63. Our next step is to come in and say we're going to multiply each side by 100. The reason we're going to multiply by 100 is because the 6 and the 3 are repeating, so our goal is to get the 6 and the 3 as a whole number. Now, just as kind of a quick reason why this works is it ends up moving the decimal 2 times. If we take 0.63 and we multiply by 100, we have 2 placeholder zeros, 1 times 3, 1 times 6, 2 numbers after the decimal point. Notice we get 63. So by multiplying by 100, it basically moves the decimal point for us because we live in a base 10 system. So when we multiply point repeated 63 by 100, we get 63 point repeated 63. Because we know there's another 63 right after that first one that's written. Well, what we do on the right, we also have to do on the left. So we multiply n by 100. Okay? We then come in and we are going to subtract the eliminated part, the repeated part. So we are coming in to subtract 0.63 repeated. Well, we know in our first step that point repeated 63 was equal to n, and if we're taking away point repeated 63, we're going to take away n. I have 100 n's and I take away 1, that leaves me with 99. If I have 63 point repeated 63, take away point repeated 63, straightforward, I'm left with just 63. Now we can write our fraction now we can take 63 and divide it by 99. If you don't want to write it as a fraction, you can use the division sign. And we know that 63 divided by 99 can be 63 over 99. We can simplify by 9 because 63 divided by 9 is 7 and 99 divided by 9 is 11. So our final answer is 7 over 11. Let's take a look at example number 2. 4 point repeated 3. So once again, n is going to equal the decimal, so we're going to let n equal point repeated 3. Pretty straightforward, right? Or excuse me, n is going to equal 4 point repeated 3. My apologies, sorry for that. Now we multiply each side by 10 because our goal is to take the decimal, and we need to get one of those 3's, the decimal on the other side of one of those 3's. We move it one place, so that means we're essentially multiplying by 10. So that becomes 4 point repeated 3 times 10 is going to be 43 point repeated 3. The 4 is not repeating, it's the whole number. We now come in and we're going to subtract the eliminated part. So we're going to subtract 4 point repeated 3. Because the repeated part, or because n has that whole number 4 with it, we have to include it when we're subtracting. And so now we can go ahead and subtract 43 point repeated 3, take away 4 point repeated 3, and we end up with 39. Again, we had 43 point repeated 3, take away 4 point repeated 3. Repeated 3, take away repeated 3, it's going to leave us with 0. And so now we just have to subtract 43 minus 4. Can't do 3 minus 4, so we borrow. The 4 becomes a 3, and the 3 becomes a 13. 13 minus 4 is 9. And then we bring 3 minus 0 is 3, so we get 39. That's how I got 39. We now can come in, and we're going to divide 39 divided by 9, which we know we can write as the fraction 39 over 9. Now we're going to simplify top and bottom by 3. And 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 9 13 times, 3 goes into 9 3 times. So we end up with 13 over 3. Now if you are absolutely dying to make this a mixed number, go ahead to make it 4 1/3, but most of the time students aren't saying, hey, give me an extra step, I love this so much, I want to do extra work. That's just not the norm. So my recommendation is leave it as an improper fraction. Going on to example 3. We're converting 0.8 repeated 3. So in this case, the difference is that we have 8 in the 10th spot. It's not being repeated. We are just repeating the 3. So we know first step is the easy one. And it's going to equal whatever our problem is. 0.8 repeated 3. Pretty straightforward. Reason we're multiplying by 100 is because we need to move the decimal point 2 spots, so that way that 3 is now a whole number. We need one of those 3's to be a whole number. So when we multiply by 100, we get 83 point repeated 3. Remember, the 8's not being repeated, just the 3. When we are asked to subtract, our goal is to get rid of the repeated part, meaning we have got to get rid of the 3's. So in this case, we're going to have to move the decimal 1 spot, which is equivalent to multiplying by 10 because we live in a base 10 system. So we're going to come in and subtract 8 point repeated 3. If we were to come in and subtract those, we have 83 point repeated 3, take away 8 point repeated 3. Once again, if we did not do that, if we just did 83 point repeated 3, take away 0.8 repeated 3, notice that we're not going to get rid of our decimals when we go to subtract. So that's why we have to move the decimal point 1 place over when we go to subtract, because we want to get rid of the repeated part. So we know that repeated 3 minus repeated 3, we know it's going to be 0. And we can't do 3 minus 8, so we borrow. 8 becomes a 7, the 3 becomes a 13. 13 minus 8 is going to be 5, bring down the 7, so we end up with 75. Now we can go through and divide 75 divided by 90, which we know is going to be a fraction. 75 over 90. And we're going to divide top and bottom by 5. By 15, sorry. $75 divided by 15 is 5. And 90 divided by 15 is 6. So we end up with 5/6 is what you get when you have 0.8 repeated 3. Looking at example 4, we have 2.7 repeated 1. Well, first step should be easy. Remember, it's always going to be, n's always going to equal whatever the problem is. 2.7 repeated 1. We know we're going to multiply by 100 because our goal is to get that 1 as a whole number. So we now have 271 point repeated 1. It should make sense that our number is going to be larger. The whole number of the decimal is going to be larger because we had a decimal that had a whole number, and that's what made it over 1. So therefore, it makes sense that when we multiply by 100, it's going to be larger than 100. Now, when we go to subtract, we note that we have to get the 1 so it's in the tenths place, and the easiest way to do this is to multiply by 10, moving the decimal place over 1. So we're now going to subtract 27 point repeated 1. And that's going to, so when we subtract, we know in order to make it repeated 1, we have to say 271 point repeated 1, take away 27 point repeated 1. We can then go through and subtract, and we end up with point repeated 1 minus point repeated 1 is going to be 0. We can't do 1 minus 7, so we borrow. 7 becomes a 6, and the 1 becomes an 11. 11 minus 7 is 4. 6 minus 2 is 4. 2 minus 0 is 2. So we get 244. Now, to get n by itself, we're going to divide. So we get 244 divided by 90. And we're going to simplify by 2. And 244 divided by 2 is 122. And 90 divided by 2 is 45. And that is a simplified fraction for 2.7 repeated 1.